What would you do if the woman you thought was just your housekeeper turned out to be the one quietly saving lives while teaching you what love truly means? The sun had just dipped behind the Seattle skyline when Jack Callahan stepped onto the front porch of his mansion, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. From the top of the stone steps, he watched his housekeeper hurry toward the gate, shopping bags clutched tightly in both hands. Her blonde braid bounced behind her as she moved, a sharp contrast against the dimming light. "Ava!" Jack called out. She froze mid-step, then turned slowly. The porch light caught the edge of her profile. Calm, polite, always polite. "Yes, Mr. Callahan? Did I forget something?" Jack narrowed his eyes, studying her expression. No trace of panic. No guilt. That somehow made him more suspicious. "Those bags," he said, gesturing with his glass. "What's in them?" Her grip on the plastic handles tightened. "Just groceries," she replied. "I picked them up during lunch." There was a beat of silence. Jack descended one step closer. "You've been leaving early a lot lately," he said. "Family emergencies, you said." "I did," Ava answered, her voice calm but firmer now. "My mother is sick. I've told you that." Jack nodded slowly, but didn't step back. "And I overheard you on the phone yesterday, asking someone for more money." Color rose in her cheeks. "I don't understand what you're implying." "I'm not implying," Jack said, his voice low. "I'm telling you. Something doesn't add up." They stood in silence, the tension between them thick as the early autumn air. Then Ava squared her shoulders. "If you don't trust me, Mr. Callahan, perhaps you should find someone else to clean your house." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing across the pavement like defiance. Jack watched her disappear around the corner, the clink of his ice cubes the only sound remaining. Inside, the mansion was silent. Too silent. He poured himself another drink and stood by the glass wall that overlooked the city. From here, everything looked in control. The skyline, the harbor, his empire. But inside, something was unraveling. He didn't like that. Jack Callahan had built his fortune in tech security software that monitored, tracked, recorded. He trusted systems, protocols, and data. People? People were messy. Unpredictable, dangerous. He had learned that the hard way. Jennifer had been the last one. Sweet voice, clean background. Walked away with his grandmother's heirloom jewelry and the spare key to his Aspen house. He'd sworn never again. Since then, every employee had gone through rigorous checks. Ava Carter had passed them all. And yet, he opened his laptop and pulled up her file. Ava Carter. Age 29. No criminal record. Social Security verified. Employment history clean. Still, there were gaps. Small ones. Unexplained evenings. One Spanish phone call that mentioned más dinero. One crumpled wire transfer receipt he'd found in her jacket pocket. $500 sent to Honduras. She'd said it was for family. But which family? For what? That afternoon, he'd noticed something else. She'd spent her entire lunch break scrolling through a jewelry website. Tennis bracelets, diamond studs, designer watches. Jack leaned back in his chair. He'd seen this pattern before. First, it was small things leaving early, private calls. Then came the bigger ones. Missing valuables. Empty accounts. His phone buzzed. Logan Pierce. Jack answered without greeting. "Any updates on Ava Carter?" "Clean," Logan replied. "Background is solid." "You're being paranoid again." "I've been paranoid for 15 years, Jack muttered. "It's why I still have a house." There was a pause. Then Logan added, "You can't live like this forever." Jack ended the call. But the doubt lingered. That evening, Ava texted, "Working late tonight, don't wait up." Working late? Jack had given her the evening off. He stood for a long time in front of the foyer mirror, keys in hand, debating. Then he made up his mind. The black Mercedes slid easily through Seattle's evening traffic. Jack stayed several cars behind, watching Ava board the 47 bus with her shopping bag still in hand. He'd done this before, followed employees home. Not often, just enough to keep himself safe. She got off in Pioneer Square, walking toward a rundown building with faded Spanish lettering. Jack parked across the street, muscles tense, heart pounding harder than it should have. Through the glass doors, he saw her greeted by an older woman with silver hair. They hugged. Ava smiled. She rarely smiled like that at his house. Then she walked to the front of a room filled with senior citizens, all holding pencils and notebooks. Jack blinked. Ava cleared her throat and spoke, her voice carrying through the windows. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight we'll practice how to order at a restaurant." Jack leaned forward, breath caught. For the next hour, he watched Ava teach English patiently, lovingly, passionately. She knelt beside chairs, corrected pronunciation, encouraged confidence. When class ended, she unpacked sandwiches and fruit from her bags and passed them around, laughing as she chatted with the group. She wasn't stealing. She was serving. Not herself. Others. Back in his cold, perfect mansion, Jack sat in the dark. No music, no distractions. Only Ava's voice echoing in his mind. His wealth had built walls, literal ones, emotional ones. It had bought him privacy, security, and distance. But that night, he realized how poor he truly was. She'd been right there, in his house, for 8 months, and he had never really seen her. Until now. Seattle's evening air was cool, brushing against Jack Callahan's neck as he leaned back in the driver's seat of his Mercedes. From across the street, he could see the faint flicker of fluorescent lights behind dusty glass windows. A painted sign above the building read, "Centro Esperanza, Community Center." This wasn't what he expected. Just an hour earlier, he'd followed Ava Carter off the 47 bus, her shopping bag still swinging at her sides. He thought she might be meeting someone, maybe pawning something. But no. She walked into a rundown community center. Jack waited in the shadows, parked near a broken street lamp. He didn't know why he stayed, maybe to confirm the lie, maybe to confront her. But instead, something else unfolded. Through the large window, Jack saw her enter a modest room filled with elderly people, Latino, Asian, a few Middle Eastern faces, seated in plastic folding chairs, notebooks on their laps. Ava placed her bags on a table, greeted them with hugs, and smiled, a kind of smile Jack had never seen in his house. She walked to the front and spoke, her voice carrying even through the thin walls. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to practice how to order food at restaurants." They laughed. They listened. They repeated phrases in hesitant English. Jack watched, stunned, as Ava gently corrected an older man's pronunciation, then knelt beside a woman and encouraged her in Spanish. Not a teacher by degree, but by instinct. And when class was over, she unpacked the shopping bags. They weren't hiding anything. Inside were sandwich fixings, fruit, crackers, simple groceries. She made plates for the students, served them one by one, chatting as they ate. No jewelry, no secret life, no scam, just kindness. For nearly an hour, Jack didn't move. He sat frozen in the front seat, hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. The woman he thought was deceiving him was using her own money and time to feed and teach strangers. Strangers no one else cared to notice. He hadn't just misjudged her, he had failed to see her at all. Back at home, Jack walked into his study and closed the door behind him. The mansion, once a symbol of pride, now felt sterile, empty, heavy. He opened his laptop and typed Centro Esperanza into the search bar. The website was outdated but filled with photos, and Ava was in all of them. Reading to children in a corner, loading food boxes into cars, teaching seniors how to use email. leading coat drives, smiling, glowing. A non-profit for immigrant communities, run on donations, struggling, according to its financial reports. Programs being cut, heating broken, supplies low. Jack clicked through the documents, reading more than he had in weeks. Ava worked 3 jobs: his house, a downtown cleaning service, and a weekend shift at a grocery store. And still she gave time, energy, money to this crumbling little center. And she never said a word about it. His phone buzzed again. It was Logan. "Anything new from your mission?" Logan joked. Jack didn't laugh. His voice came out rough. "I'm an idiot." There was a pause. "You found something, didn't you?" "She's not stealing from me," Jack said. "She's good." "Good?" "Actually good. Her mother really is sick. The money those wire transfers, it's for medical bills. The center, it's barely hanging on. And she volunteers there every night." Silence. Then Logan asked, softly, "When's the last time you met someone genuinely good, Jack?" Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen. "I don't think I ever have." The next morning, Jack lingered in the kitchen longer than usual. It wasn't like him to be out of his office this early, but when Ava arrived, he was there, coffee in hand, leaning against the counter like he'd just happened to be thinking. She looked surprised. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan. I'll stay out of your way." He cleared his throat. "Actually, I was wondering if you could join me." "Just for a minute." She froze, dish towel in hand. "Is something wrong?" "No." He gestured to the table. I'd like to hear about your evening classes." Ava blinked. "My what?" "Your volunteer work, teaching English." She went still. Her posture changed, careful and defensive. "I don't know what you mean." Jack sighed and met her gaze. "I followed you last night." The silence was immediate, cold. She sank into a chair, her shoulders dropping. "Are you going to fire me?" "Fire you? Why would I do that?" "Because I lied about working late." "Because I used my lunch break to buy food for the center. Because I've been distracted, thinking about my students instead of your house." Jack stared at her, this woman who thought compassion was a fireable offense. "Tell me about them," he said. Ava hesitated. Then something softened in her. "They're mostly elderly," she began. "Some have lived here for decades but never learned English. Maria is 73. She just wants to talk to her doctor without needing her granddaughter to translate. Carlos worked construction for 40 years, but he can't read safety signs." Her voice warmed as she continued. "They're proud people. They don't want pity, just a chance." Jack listened as the cautious housekeeper disappeared, replaced by a woman full of purpose and quiet fire. "And the center?" he asked. She looked down. "We're barely making rent. I do what I can, food, supplies, but it's not enough." That afternoon, Jack made a quiet decision. He used a shell company and a fake name. Within minutes, Centro Esperanza had received a $50,000 donation, enough to cover repairs, supplies, and several months of operations. No one would ever know it came from him, but for the first time in years, his money felt meaningful. The next morning, Ava burst into the kitchen, breathless and glowing. "Mr. Callahan, you won't believe it!" Jack looked up from his coffee, pretending to be surprised. "What happened?" "The center," she exclaimed. "Someone donated $50,000 last night, anonymous." "They said they believed in our mission." Jack's lips twitched. "That's wonderful news. We can fix the heater, buy textbooks. Maybe even start a computer class." Her eyes sparkled. "Maria cried when I told her." And in that moment, as he watched her joy spill over like sunlight, Jack Callahan felt something stir deep in his chest. Not suspicion, not guilt, hope. Jack Callahan had written 1,000 checks in his lifetime. Board members, startups, political campaigns, donations that came with handshakes and glossy brochures, a name on a plaque. A photo op for the press. But this one? This one felt different. No one would know it came from him. No headlines, no speeches. Just a quiet wire transfer from a shell company to a community center most of his peers had never heard of. Centro Esperanza. A place he only found because of suspicion. A place where his housekeeper became someone else entirely, alive, purposeful, vibrant. He stared at the confirmation screen after submitting the donation. $50,000. Enough to fix the heater, enough to keep the lights on, enough to buy textbooks, art supplies, maybe even pay a part-time staffer. For once, his wealth didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a key. The next morning, Ava Carter walked into the kitchen and lit up the room. She was breathless, carrying a clipboard and a wide, stunned smile. "Mr. Callahan, you won't believe this." Jack, already at the counter with his coffee, looked up. "Try me." "The center," she said, barely able to contain herself. "Someone donated $50,000 last night, just out of nowhere. It's anonymous. They said they believe in our mission." Jack raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "That's incredible." She was glowing. "Not just happy changed. We can finally repair the roof, update the ESL curriculum, maybe even start that computer lab I've been dreaming about." Jack took a sip of coffee to hide his smile. "I'm happy for you," he said softly. "You have no idea," Ava said, almost laughing. "Maria hugged me so hard I almost cried." Then, quieter. "I think it's the first time in a while she believed someone outside our community actually cared." Jack said nothing. He didn't need to. Her joy was more than enough. That week, he found himself inventing reasons to linger in the kitchen while Ava was working. She'd hum softly while she organized the pantry or chop vegetables with perfect precision. There was a rhythm to her presence, a peace. Once, he walked in just as she was wiping down the marble island. "I was just finishing up," she said. "No rush," Jack replied. "I forgot my charger in here anyway." She smiled, just a little, and he found himself staying long after he'd retrieved the charger. Another afternoon, she was reorganizing the bookshelf in his office. "These are all alphabetical by author," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Would you prefer them by subject instead?" Jack shrugged. "Surprise me." She laughed, and the sound caught him off guard. It was beautiful. He started noticing more things. The way she made lists in tiny cursive. The way she spoke to the delivery drivers with kindness and dignity. The way she sometimes stood in front of the window during her break, sipping tea and watching the world like she belonged to it fully, unapologetically. She wasn't just kind. She was strong. Brave, tireless. He had spent years surrounded by polished people who wore ambition like armor. But Ava? She wore her purpose like a second skin. One evening, as she was finishing dinner prep, Jack lingered near the stove. "Do you ever sleep?" he asked, watching her slice peppers. She smiled. "Not as much as I should." "You work here, the cleaning service, weekends at the store, and still volunteer every night?" "Most nights," she corrected. He frowned. "Why?" Her hands paused. "Because I've been where they are. When my mom and I first came here, we didn't speak English. I was 12, translating bills and medical notes and job applications." She set down the knife. "Centro Esperanza gave us our start. I promised myself when I was old enough, stable enough, I'd give back." Jack nodded slowly. "I didn't know," he said. "You weren't supposed to." That night, he sat at his desk and scrolled through her center's online wish list. There were no grand asks, not luxury, just basics. Notebooks, USB drives, folding chairs. An industrial coffee maker. Jack clicked, "Buy all." A few days later, Ava arrived to find boxes on the doorstep of the center. Her face lit up as she opened them with Clara and Richard by her side. Jack watched it all on the local news, no mention of a donor, just gratitude, And that was enough. He started making these quiet gestures more often. A second donation smaller, but timed perfectly after she mentioned needing money for winter coats. Another anonymous transfer after she said the copier had died. He became a shadow helper, funding things she never asked for but deeply needed. It wasn't charity, it was partnership, even if she didn't know it. One snowy Thursday morning, Ava arrived earlier than usual. Jack was already in the kitchen, preparing coffee. "Storm's coming," he said. "I know," she replied, brushing snow off her coat. "We're handing out food boxes tonight at the center. Some of our students live in vans. You're doing it in this weather?" "They need it," she said simply. He hesitated. "Do you need help?" She blinked, caught off guard. Then she smiled. "You offering to pack boxes, Mr. Callahan?" "I'm offering to do what I can," Ava nodded. "We could always use one more pair of hands." He didn't go that night. Not yet. But the seed had been planted. And for the first time in his life, Jack Callahan, a man who had spent his entire adult life protecting himself from betrayal, guarding his fortune, doubting motives, realized he wanted to be part of something, not just fund it, live it. And the woman who had once been a line item on his payroll was now something far more complex. An awakening. A reminder. A quiet revolution in his heart. Jack Callahan wasn't used to coincidence. He didn't believe in accidents, or timing, or fate. He believed in control. Schedules. Systems. So when he found himself walking into the kitchen, just as Ava Carter was wiping down the counters, it wasn't coincidence. It was intention. He had memorized her routine without realizing it when she usually arrived, how long she spent prepping meals, where she liked to stand during her mid-morning tea break. He wasn't proud of it, but he didn't stop himself either. There was something about her presence, quiet, yes, but grounding. And somehow, in a house filled with silence and sharp lines, she made the place feel soft. "Back so soon?" Ava teased one morning, raising an eyebrow as Jack appeared for the third time that week during her cleaning hours. He smirked. "I could ask you the same." She shook her head, smiling slightly. "You're always working. I figured you lived in that office." "I do." "But the kitchen has better coffee." He watched her wipe down the stovetop, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned loosely. It was the kind of image that would never appear in a magazine spread, but something about it felt more real than anything else in his life. "Do you ever rest?" he asked again. Ava glanced at him. "You already asked me that last week. And your answer still isn't convincing." She smiled, but her eyes were tired. "I'll rest when the work is done." A few days later, Jack passed by the dining room and saw her placing fresh flowers in a glass vase. "New addition?" he asked. Ava jumped slightly. "Oh, I hope you don't mind." "I picked them up at the market. The house felt a little too museum-like." Jack glanced around. She wasn't wrong. Every surface gleamed, every corner perfect. Lifeless perfection. "I don't mind," he said. "Actually, it's nice." She nodded, pleased. Flowers remind people the world's still beautiful even when life isn't. He looked at her. "Is that how you see it?" "Some days," she said quietly, "you have to hold on to small beauty when the big things feel out of reach." Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't. But he left the flowers there and made sure they were replaced every week. Their conversations started growing longer, more personal. Ava told him about her thesis study on economic inequality in immigrant communities, how access to language, job training, and support networks could make or break a family's future. She spoke not with bitterness but clarity, like someone who had lived it and refused to let it define her. "I want to help people get unstuck," she said once, drying her hands at the sink. So many of our students were professionals back home, engineers, business owners, teachers, but here, they clean offices, serve food. Not because they're less smart, just less seen. Jack leaned against the counter, absorbing her words. You ever think about politics? She laughed. God, no. I like fixing real problems, not just debating them. He found himself wanting to listen more, to understand. Because the more he saw of her, the real her, the more the version he'd imagined months ago began to fade. She wasn't the help. She was a force of nature in a borrowed uniform. One morning she arrived earlier than usual, and he found her at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and highlighters. Sorry, she said quickly. I wanted to get my hours in before class tonight. What are you studying? Ava glanced up. Social work. Grad program starts in March. Jack sat across from her. Tell me about it. And so she did. For nearly an hour, she explained her research on how community centers were often the last safety net for immigrant families, how a broken system punished people for needing help, how pride and survival often collided. She spoke with passion, her hands moving as she described potential programs, funding models, real-life stories. Jack listened, not just politely, fully. He forgot about his phone, his meetings, his email inbox. He was watching something rare, someone in complete alignment with their calling. You're impressive, he said when she paused. Ava blushed. It's just research, won't change anything. Don't say that, Jack leaned forward. You're already changing things. At the center, with your students, with me. Their eyes met. And for a second, just 1 second, something fragile passed between them, a quiet understanding. Then Ava looked away and gathered her papers. I should get back to work. That afternoon, Jack made a decision. When Ava returned from the center that evening, she found a folder placed neatly on the kitchen island. Inside was an offer letter. A full-time household manager position, better salary, health insurance, paid vacation, flexible hours to accommodate her studies. It was more than a raise. It was security. She stared at the paper, stunned. Mr. Callahan, this is generous, but I don't understand. You're smart, responsible. You care about doing things right. I trust you. Ava looked at him, eyes searching. You barely trusted me to dust your books 6 months ago. Jack exhaled. I was wrong. The salary, she said softly, would pay for my mom's treatments. Cover tuition, keep the center afloat. You've earned it, Jack replied. And then some. Ava held the folder like it might disappear. Can I think about it? Of course. But Jack could already see it in her eyes. This offer came with a cost. Because taking this job wouldn't just be about money. It might mean giving up the things that made her come alive. That night, Jack sat in his home office, the city lights blinking in the distance. He'd never offered someone this much without expecting anything in return, and yet he knew he didn't want to own Ava's time. He wanted to support her purpose. He wanted to be part of whatever came next, even if she didn't choose him, even if she never knew what she meant to him. A week passed. The offer letter still sat on Ava's nightstand, unread past the first paragraph. Every night she told herself she'd decide. Every morning she walked into Jack Callahan's mansion with the weight of the choice pressing on her chest like a stone. It was a good offer. More than good, life-changing, health insurance for her mother. Time to study. A salary that would finally let her stop juggling 3 jobs. It was everything she thought she'd been working toward. But it also meant leaving behind something else, something harder to name, something she feared losing more than she could admit. On Friday afternoon, as the winter light faded outside Jack's home office, Ava knocked softly on the open door. Jack looked up from his laptop, heart catching in his throat the moment he saw her expression. She was holding the folder. I've decided about the job, she said. Jack sat up straighter, unsure whether to brace or hope. I'm grateful, Mr. Callahan, really, but I can't accept. He blinked. Why not? Ava looked down for a moment, searching for the right words. Then she met his eyes. Because I'd be living someone else's dream. Not mine. Jack said nothing. She continued, her voice quiet but steady. The center needs me. My thesis matters to me, and if I took this job, I'd feel like I was betraying that. A pause. And, honestly, she hesitated, then let the truth out in one long breath. I've fallen in love with someone impossible. Jack's heart stuttered. His breath caught. I'm sorry, she added quickly. That was too personal. I shouldn't have said that. She turned to go, but Jack stood, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone impossible. Ava stopped, but didn't turn around. Someone who represents everything I want to do with my life. Someone who makes me want to be better, do more, give more. Jack took a step forward. But you said it's impossible. She nodded. Because we're from different worlds. Because he doesn't see me that way. Because I'd never risk the work I'm doing just to chase something that might not be real. The words felt like a knife, clean, gentle, and devastating. For the first time since his parents' death, Jack Callahan felt something deep inside him break. That weekend, he didn't leave his house. He buried himself in spreadsheets and contracts and emails. He told himself it was business, but all he saw were flashes of Ava, her laugh, her quiet intensity, the way she brought life into a room simply by being in it. She loved someone else, someone impossible, someone who inspired her to serve others, to follow her passion, to stand taller. And it wasn't him. On Monday, Ava returned to work as usual, but the air between them had changed. Jack greeted her from behind a newspaper, his voice neutral. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Callahan. No more casual questions. No kitchen chats, no quiet smiles exchanged over fresh flowers or shared jokes, just walls. Professional, polite, and painful. By Friday, Ava knocked on his office door again. He looked up, trying not to flinch. I need to give you my notice, she said. The words hit harder than he expected. You're leaving? Ava nodded. 2 weeks. I've been accepted into a graduate program, social work. I start my practicum in March. Jack swallowed, forcing a nod. Congratulations. That's quite an achievement. Thank you, she said, standing with her hands folded, like she wasn't sure what to do with herself. I'll make sure everything is perfect before I go. I can train my replacement if you'd like. That won't be necessary. The silence stretched like a held breath. I'm proud of you, Jack said at last. Oh. What you're doing, it matters. Her shoulders dropped a little. That means more than you know. The next 2 weeks passed in slow, quiet agony. Jack memorized her routine, the way she hummed while folding laundry, the soft sigh she let out when reading notes from the center, the way she paused to check her phone for updates about her mother's health. He helped her prep for interviews, even wrote a recommendation letter that read more like a love letter he'd never send. And when Seattle Community Services called to schedule her final round of interviews, he was the one who told her, "They want to meet you next Wednesday." Ava's face lit up like sunlight through winter fog. Really? You'll be perfect for it, Jack said, even as something inside him splintered. The night before her final day, she stayed late to organize his files. Jack brought her a cup of coffee and found her quietly crying at the kitchen table. What's wrong? She shook her head. Nothing. Just tired. Ava, it's stupid, she whispered. I'm leaving to pursue my dream and I'm still going to miss this. The talks. The feeling like someone actually cared about my work. Jack sat down across from her. Someone does care. She smiled weakly. Thank you. There was so much he wanted to say. About the donations, the silent help, the nights he waited just to say good morning. Instead, he asked, the person you mentioned, the one you love, have you told him? She shook her head. What's the point? We're from different worlds. He'd never see me as anything more than... She gestured vaguely. What I am. Jack's voice was rough. You're not nothing. You're kind to say that. He wasn't being kind. He was being honest. On her final morning, Ava finished her last tasks with care. The house gleamed. Jack handed her an envelope. Inside, her final paycheck and a bonus large enough to cover her mother's treatments for a full year. Ava stared at it, wide-eyed. This is too much. You've been invaluable to me, he said softly. Consider it a graduation gift. Her voice trembled. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep in touch. Let me know how you're doing. Of course. They stood in the entryway, unwilling to say goodbye. Finally, Ava stepped forward and hugged him, briefly, gently, heartbreakingly. Thank you for everything, Mr. Callahan. You've been more than an employer. You've been a friend. Take care of yourself, Ava. And then she was gone. Jack stood in the doorway long after the door clicked shut. The house behind him was spotless, organized, and completely empty. He had built a fortress to keep the world out. But somewhere along the way, he'd let someone in. And now that she was gone, the silence no longer felt like peace. It felt like punishment. 3 weeks had passed since Ava Carter walked out of Jack Callahan's front door for the last time. The house was clean. The routines ran like clockwork. Sharon Blake, the new housekeeper, was precise, efficient, and quiet. But the place felt colder than ever. She didn't hum. She didn't bring flowers. She didn't ask questions that made Jack pause long enough to remember he was more than a CEO. He buried himself in work, closed 3 investment deals in 2 days, overhauled a product line, and met with 3 venture capital firms. But nothing felt real. Every night, he found himself wandering through the house, touching the surfaces Ava used to polish, pausing by the bookshelf she had alphabetized. Once, he stood outside the kitchen and listened for a voice that wasn't there. And when silence answered, he went back upstairs and stared at the ceiling for hours. The worst part. She was thriving. Logan Pierce, ever discreet, offered updates during their weekly lunches. She got the job at Seattle Community Services, he reported over sushi. Started last week, social worker for immigrant families. Jack only nodded. She's doing well. Her thesis got published in a regional journal, and she moved into a better apartment downtown. That's good, Jack replied, eyes on his plate. Oh, and she brought her mother to Seattle for a visit. Ava's been taking her to appointments, even enrolled her in English classes. Jack's chest tightened. That's great, he murmured. He wanted to be happy for her, and he was, but it hurt. It hurt because she was no longer in his orbit, because everything she had once shared with him, her worries, her wins, her quiet courage, now belonged to others, and he had no right to ask for any of it back. Still, he couldn't help himself. He visited the Centro Esperanza website more often than he cared to admit, watched as new programs were launched. A financial literacy course, a digital literacy workshop, a food pantry expansion. All things she had dreamed of, all things he had helped fund quietly, anonymously. She never knew. And maybe that was for the best, because what mattered most was that she was building her future, with or without him. One night in late February, Jack sat in his office staring at a framed photo on his bookshelf, a black and white print of Seattle's skyline. He used to love that photo. Now it just looked distant. A calendar reminder blinked on his screen. Centro Esperanza Annual Gala, March 18th, 6:30 p.m. He hadn't realized he was still on the mailing list. He almost deleted the notification, but instead, his cursor hovered. Sophia would be there. Logan's voice echoed in his head. She's not married, you know, still single. Jack scoffed. Doesn't matter. Why not? Because she's happy. And I'm just... A mistake she moved past. But as the day drew near, he found himself doing the one thing he hadn't done in months, choosing a suit, Not for a board meeting, not for an investor dinner, but for a night that just might reopen a door he thought was closed forever. The night of the gala. The Centro Esperanza Community Center looked nothing like the rundown building Jack Callahan had once watched from across the street. String lights hung from the ceiling like stars. Tables draped in white linen filled the room, each centerpiece crafted by hand, likely by volunteers Ava had recruited. Children ran between chairs, laughter echoing in multiple languages. It was alive. It was joyful, warm, everything Jack had spent years keeping out of his life. He adjusted his navy suit jacket and stepped through the front doors. No security, no red carpet. No pretense, just community. And somewhere in the crowd, Ava. Across the room, Ava Carter stood near the entrance, chatting with a family she had helped resettle earlier that winter. She wore a simple black dress, hair swept up, and a quiet glow that radiated beyond anything makeup or lighting could produce. She was in her element. When she glanced up and saw him, Jack, standing just inside the doorway, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit, she froze. Their eyes met. Everything else fell away. Jack took a breath. He hadn't planned what he'd say. He hadn't planned anything, really, just showed up because he couldn't not show up. Before he could move toward her, an elderly man approached with a smile. "Mr. Callahan," the man asked. "Yes?" "Carlos Mendez," he said, extending a hand. "Ava has told us so much about you." Jack blinked. "She has?" "Of course. She said you were always kind to her, helped her in difficult times. She speaks highly of you." Jack shook his hand, trying not to show how much that meant. Then the lights dimmed, and the evening's program began. Ava was called to the stage as the Volunteer of the Year. Jack clapped quietly, his hands steady, even though his heart wasn't. She accepted the small crystal plaque, standing at the podium with poise and grace. "This community," she began, "has given me far more than I could ever repay. When I first came here, I felt invisible. But here, I learned that everyone has value, that even when systems fail us, people can lift each other up." She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "We also have an anonymous donor to thank, someone whose generosity saved our center, funded new programs, and gave hope when we were running on fumes. Whoever you are, thank you. You reminded us that kindness still exists, and sometimes angels appear when we need them most." Jack stared at the floor. His hands were clenched in his lap. She still didn't know. After the applause, Ava descended the stage and was pulled into a dozen conversations. Jack stayed in the background, watching her light up every interaction, wondering if he should just slip away. But then she turned and walked straight toward him. "Mr. Callahan," she said, breathless, eyes searching his face. "I can't believe you're here." He smiled softly. "Congratulations, you deserve the recognition." "Thank you," she said. "This is surreal." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the room fading around them. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. "My mom." "1 second." She answered in Spanish, her tone bright, her eyes misting with happy tears. When she hung up, she beamed at Jack. "She's officially in remission. The doctor just confirmed it." Jack felt something twist in his chest. "That's wonderful," he said. "You must be relieved." "I am. And grateful. We never could have paid for her treatment without, well, someone's help. I still don't know who they are." Her voice softened. "But if I ever find them, I hope they know how much they changed my life." Jack swallowed hard. Then he looked into her eyes and made a choice. "Ava," he said, "there's something I need to tell you." "Ava," Jack said, his voice quiet, edged with something fragile. "I need to tell you something about the anonymous donor." Ava tilted her head, brows drawing together. "What about them?" He took a breath. It was me. Her expression didn't change at first, just stillness. Jack continued before he lost the nerve. The donation that saved the center, the computers for the lab, the money for your mother's surgery, all of it. I was behind it. The words landed like thunder in a silent room. Ava's mouth parted slightly. The plaque in her hand trembled. What? I followed you that night, he said softly. Months ago. I thought you were stealing from me. And instead, I saw you teaching, serving, giving everything you had. I realized how wrong I was, so I tried to help, quietly. Her eyes widened with dawning horror. You followed me. I didn't mean to invade your life, he said quickly. At first it was suspicion, then it became admiration. And eventually, something more. Ava took a step back. Wait, you've been watching my life, manipulating it, without telling me. It wasn't like that, Jack said, panic rising. I only wanted to help. You decided what I needed, what my mother needed, what our center needed without asking, without ever giving me the choice. The warmth in her voice was gone. Only disbelief remained. I thought I was making things easier for you, he said. You thought you knew better, she snapped, eyes flashing. You thought you could swoop in and fix everything like I was some charity project. Jack reached for her, instinctively. Ava, please. Don't, she said, pulling away. You had every opportunity to tell me. You looked me in the eye, week after week, and said nothing. I was ashamed, Jack said, his voice breaking. Ashamed of how I first saw you. Ashamed that I didn't trust you. And later, I was afraid. Afraid you'd push me away if you knew it all came from me. Ava turned away, trying to compose herself, her back rising and falling with each breath. Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding. Then he said quietly, It wasn't charity. She looked at him, her voice suddenly gentler but full of pain. Then what was it? Jack stepped closer, his voice low, steady now. It was love. She froze. I fell in love with your strength, your compassion, your drive. You reminded me of everything I forgot to believe in. You showed me what wealth is really for. Ava shook her head. I told you I loved someone impossible, and all this time, it was you. Jack blinked. What? She looked up at him, eyes shining. You were the man, the one I thought I couldn't have. The one who inspired me. Then why? Jack started. Because I thought you'd never see me as anything more than your housekeeper, she whispered. I thought the distance between our lives was too far to cross. I thought I was just part of the help. You were never just anything, Jack said, stepping forward. You were the first person I trusted in years, the only one who ever challenged me to be better. A long silence stretched between them. Then Ava said, her voice breaking, You really don't understand what you've done. Jack nodded. No, I didn't. But I'm trying, and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life earning your trust if you'll let me. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it quickly. We're both idiots, she said softly. Jack laughed, quiet and raw, completely. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Then finally, she took a slow step forward. What now? She asked. Jack reached for her hands. I don't just want to date you, Ava. I want to build something with you. Use what I have to support what you're already doing. Not as charity, as equals. Her eyes searched his. You want to be my partner? In crime, he said, smiling, and in community development. A soft laugh escaped her lips. You're impossible. I know, he said. Then finally, she leaned in. And when they kissed, gently, honestly, without any secrets left between them, it felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of something real. The week after the gala passed like a dream Jack Callahan didn't want to wake from. He and Ava Carter didn't rush anything. There were no grand declarations splashed across headlines, no luxury getaways or extravagant gestures. Instead, there were quiet mornings, coffee brewed together in his once lonely kitchen. Evening walks, where conversations wandered from family to purpose to favorite street food. And shared plans, scribbled across napkins and sticky notes, for new programs they could launch together at Centro Esperanza. For the first time in his life, Jack wasn't strategizing for power or control. He was building something real with someone who challenged him, inspired him, loved him, without needing him to be anything other than himself. One crisp spring afternoon, Jack found Ava sitting on the floor of his home office, surrounded by stacks of papers and notebooks. She was editing her proposal for a new immigrant mentorship initiative, one that paired retired professionals with newcomers in their former fields. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her brow furrow in concentration. "You look like a woman on a mission." She glanced up. "I am. If this gets funded, we can launch by summer." He crossed the room and sat beside her. "You know, I've been thinking." "Uh-oh," she teased. "I don't just want to support your work, I want to be part of it, all of it." Ava set her pen down. "You already are." "No," Jack said. I want to wake up every day knowing we're in this together. Not just as co-donors or collaborators, but as partners. In life." Her eyes widened slightly. "Jack." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. No fireworks. No fancy dinners. Just him, the woman he loved, and the truth he was finally ready to say out loud. "I want to marry you, Ava. Not because I'm trying to rescue anyone, not because I'm lonely, but because with you, I finally feel like I have a home. A purpose." He opened the box. Inside sat a ring simple, elegant, and unlike anything money usually bought. The diamond was surrounded by tiny sapphires, blue like the Seattle sky after rain. Ava stared at it, silent. Then, slowly, tears filled her eyes. "You want to be my partner," she whispered. "In all of it." Jack nodded. "In the fights, in the joy, in the quiet work that no one sees." She reached out and closed his fingers around the box. "I don't need the ring to say yes," she said softly, "but I do want the life." They didn't plan a glamorous wedding. Instead, they chose Centro Esperanza, the place where everything had begun. The space was decorated with flowers from local gardens. Children from the after-school program made paper garlands. Volunteers cooked tamales and rice and baked too many desserts. Guests came from both their world's tech executives in tailored suits, sitting beside retired mechanics, housekeepers, ESL students, non-profit leaders, and it felt right. Miss Thelma Ava's mother stood beside her daughter as she adjusted her veil, smiling through happy tears. "He's a good man," she whispered in Spanish. "Different from what I expected." "But good." Ava smiled, remembering the first night she saw Jack's Mercedes idling outside the center, how she thought he'd come to accuse her of stealing. Instead, he had come to find the truth, and in the process, he'd found her. When Jack saw her walk down the aisle, her steps steady, her eyes locked on his, he knew without a doubt. He had spent his whole life building empires, but this woman, she was the foundation he never knew he needed. They wrote their own vows. "I promise," Ava said, her voice steady, "to challenge you, to dream with you, to never let either of us forget who we serve." "And I promise," Jack replied, "to never hide behind money again, to show up every day with heart and humility, to follow your lead when I don't have the answers." They kissed to thunderous applause and confetti made of recycled program flyers. It was messy. It was beautiful. It was them. Later, as they danced to a slow, imperfect song played by a student quartet, Ava leaned into Jack's chest and whispered, "You remember when I said I loved someone impossible?" He smiled. "Vividly. You weren't impossible. No? She looked up. Just unlikely. Jack kissed her forehead. Well, he said, I've always liked beating the odds. A year later, the Centro Esperanza Community Center had never looked more beautiful. White roses and baby's breath filled the hall. String lights draped from the rafters like stars gathered for a celebration. Paper butterflies, hand-cut by the after-school students, lined the walls. At the front of the room, a simple wooden arch was wrapped in flowers and hope. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a homecoming. Ava Carter stood at the back of the room, her hand in her mother's as they waited for the music to begin. She wore her grandmother's wedding dress, restored with careful stitches and love. Her mother, Miss Thelma, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief she'd sworn she wouldn't use. You ready, mihija? Ava smiled, her heart full. More than ever. At the front, Jack Callahan waited in a navy blue tuxedo that somehow made him look both powerful and humbled. His usual sharp posture had softened. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who knew exactly who he was standing beside. His best man, Logan Pierce, leaned in. Last chance to panic, Jack chuckled. This is the first thing I've ever done that doesn't scare me. The music swelled. The crowd rose. And Ava walked down the aisle, past business associates who once didn't know her name, past former ESL students beaming with pride, past elderly volunteers and children who now called her Miss Ava with affection. At the altar, Reverend Whitaker, who'd married half the families in the neighborhood, welcomed everyone. Today, he said, we gather not just to witness a wedding, but to celebrate a union of values, of purpose, and of deep, enduring love. Jack and Ava had written their own vows. Jack went first. Ava, you taught me that wealth is not measured by what we keep, but by what we give. You showed me that trust is a strength, not a weakness. And you reminded me that the best partnerships aren't built on power, they're built on purpose. I promise to stand beside you, behind you, and sometimes even be brave enough to follow you. Ava's eyes shimmered. Jack, she said, you showed me that people can change and that love can begin in the most unlikely of places. I promise to challenge you, to believe in you, and to keep reminding us both that our lives are not our own, they're meant to lift others. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. When Reverend Whitaker pronounced them husband and wife, the center erupted in cheers. Mariartha, 74-year-old former student turned translator, threw rice into the air, despite the very large sign that said, "No rice, please." The kids from the after-school program rushed forward with handmade cards. Miss Thelma fussed over Jack's tie while teaching Logan Spanish, and Carlos, the retired engineer, clinked his glass loudly and declared the party officially started. It wasn't elegant. It was perfect. In the months that followed, Jack and Ava launched the Carter Callahan Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to expanding access to education, healthcare, and job training for immigrant communities across the Pacific Northwest. Jack used his connections to raise funds and build partnerships. Ava oversaw programs on the ground, mentoring new social workers, expanding outreach, and always listening. Their lives were no longer separate lanes. They were one path, winding and purposeful, paved with shared mission and mutual love. One evening, just as the center was closing, Ava found herself standing in the same classroom where she'd first taught an English lesson to a group of nervous, determined adults. The chalkboard now bore a plaque, the Ava Carter Callahan Learning Room, where every voice matters. Jack stepped in behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Regrets?" he asked. "Only one," she replied with a soft smile. "What's that?" "That we didn't start sooner." He kissed her temple. "We started exactly when we were meant to." Outside, the lights of Seattle sparkled like promises. And inside, two people once strangers divided by status and suspicions stood side by side, not just in love, but in service. Because sometimes the richest life is the one you build together. Life lesson from Jack and Ava's story. Sometimes the people we misjudge are the very ones sent to teach us how to live with more heart. Jack Callahan, a wealthy man surrounded by walls of mistrust, believed he had everything until he met Ava Carter, a humble housekeeper whose quiet compassion changed his life. Her generosity, unseen and uncelebrated, revealed a truth many forget. Kindness isn't loud, but it's powerful. As Jack learned to trust, to give without control, and to love without conditions, he discovered something money could never buy: a life of purpose. For those of us in our later years, this story reminds us it's never too late to grow, to make amends, or to start again with grace. Love and meaning don't always come with a grand entrance. Sometimes they arrive in the form of someone folding your laundry and feeding the hungry on their lunch break. And if we dare to follow not out of suspicion, but out of curiosity, we might just find that the richest life is built not by what we keep, but by what we give away. Kindness, humility. Second chances. These aren't just ideals, they're invitations. Even now, especially now,